My name is Yvonne Charles. I was born in Silver City, New Mexico, on September 10, 1926. I lived there for about 2.5 years, and my father, a mining engineer, accepted a contract at the Cerro de Pascal mine in South America, in Peru. So we moved there, and he had a 3-year contract. And so we lived at 14,000 feet for about 1.5 years. And when my brother and I, there was a mine strike, so we had to go to the lower levels to get away from the problems. And we both contracted malaria, which was fairly serious in those days. So my mother brought us back. So we were there just, I guess, about 1.5 years. We came to California, and then eventually went back to Colorado, and then to Central City for about 1.5 years, till 1933, I think it was. This was because my father was still, of course, doing some mining. And the mining business was not doing too well, so he looked around a little further and decided that maybe a little adventure out in the Philippine Islands would be a little bit more profitable. So late 1933, we went out there. And that's where we lived until the war started. And, of course, we're out there when the war began, and became guests of the Japanese. So.
Just where were you living in the Philippines?
Well, we lived in Manila most of the time. My father was he was superintendent of one of the mines in the provinces, Paracali, which probably doesn't mean too much. It was a little place on the island of Luzon, south of Manila. And my brother and I stayed in Manila because of schooling. So I was 7 years old and going to school and living with a German lady in a boarding house, room in a boarding house, which was not the greatest experience at that age. But so then the next year, my mother and father were able to arrange for a tutor, and she lived with us down in the provinces. So we stayed. I think the next year we were there for our schooling, and then did move up to Manila. And I think that was when I was about 10. So we were there in Manila for the duration until after the war.
What happened? Did you at your young age even realize what was going on, how dangerous it was becoming?
Oh, I think to a certain extent. I was 15 when the war broke out, and I have letters that my mother had written that were returned later to sisters back here in the States, and the family certainly knew that there was something going on, because quite a few people did feel that they should maybe get back to the States, bring at least the families. Maybe the husbands stayed out because of their work. My father had been in the First World War as a Navy man, and was called back into reserves about a year before the war. So we, of course, for that reason, we knew there was a reason. They were quite concerned about what might be developing. And we were advised to leave. All of the naval families were advised to leave, our Army families, but we chose to stay out. My mother, of course, and father made that choice. We felt we were actually pretty safe. There was an island, of Corregidor, which was out in the Bay of Manila, and we seemed to feel that was the one thing that would keep the Japanese or any enemy from being a threat, and which didn't last very long. So we were caught out there. But we had some ideas that we had an inkling that there would be something developing. But we weren't terribly concerned. I guess we felt that Japan wasn't that much of a threat.
We'll kind of go back. So you really hadn't realized that they were going to be as much danger. What really happened then? You knew then that they were attacking Corregidor.
Oh, well, they didn't actually attack Corregidor. I mean, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, the Japanese actually had planned to go to Clark Field, the Army base, and they bombed it. I think it was very early in the morning. We had been there the day before visiting friends sons of families that my parents had known in New Mexico. And so we got back, I think it was quite late, and had gone to school that morning, which was routine, of course. And but we were sent home early because planes came over to Manila. They had already bombed Clark Field, came over towards Manila, and they immediately, of course, evacuated the schools. And so it really happened pretty much simultaneously. The war broke out in the Philippines. I don't think you hear as much about it as you do the Pearl Harbor raid, because there wasn't the damage at that time. Although we had the naval base, Cavite, which they started bombing, and it did continue from then on quite regularly.
Now, you were with your mother and brother at this time?
We were a family. We were living in the outskirts of Manila, and the whole family. Our father was with us. He, he was going to the naval base daily, and he did go out to Cavite when, of course, the war broke out. They had quite a bit that they needed to secure and whatnot. And no, we were a family. We had relatives. We have an uncle, and his family were also there. So we were all together at that time. Uh-huh.
When did the Japanese come in, and what was it like?
Well, do you mean the Japanese personally to our place?
Yes.
All right. We were, I guess the war broke out. It was December 8th for us. And we, of course, stayed home pretty much because they were very visible. They came into the city. I think it was about the 1st of January they declared Manila an open city. They were pretty much taking over the city. There was, it wasn't obvious. There wasn't a lot of fighting going on. We stayed pretty much inside. Just we didn't go out in the streets. We knew it wasn't safe. But it was about early January. I kept a diary the whole time, and I should have referred to it. It was very early in January. They came out to the house and said that they would. They wanted us to register to take pack up clothes for 3 days, food and clothes, and we were to be taken in to register. And there was no other comments made, and we felt, well, maybe that was all that was going to be done, and that we would return home. We had no idea what their intentions were. So we were picked up. They had a truck or some vehicle and took us in, and we were never, of course, taken back to we never were allowed to leave. And this was the way they approached everybody in the city that were Americans or sympathetic to the American cause. There were quite a few different people out there from different, it was a very mixed group, many people from all over, Europeans and Americans. So, and we were taken to University of Santo Tomas, the very old university out there, which was a fairly large area, had a large compound, and this was our home for 3 years and a month.
So you went to Santo Tomas?
Santo Tomas, uh-huh.
What was it like there?
Well, it's a large university. There was a main building, and there were several other buildings on the campus. There was an area, it was run by the Catholic monks. They had their own quarters, which were kept separate from ours. They were isolated from us, actually, during the war. And there was a gymnasium. All of these buildings were used for dormitories, and we took the schoolrooms. They packed us in as close as they could, 30 or 40 to a room, depending on the size of the room. It was, you had 2 beds. Well, first we had no beds. We were just makeshifting. We, I think, slept on concrete floors, and it was rather miserable the first few weeks because there was no organized system. The Japanese had not organized. They didn't take time. They weren't too concerned about the organization. Actually, the organization that took place was because of the people that were there, the internees. And so we finally got a makeshift kitchen going, and food. There were people that didn't have the resources that some of us had because we had lived there before the war, had some servants. This was a style of living when you were in the Philippines that were very faithful. One of our servants came in a couple of 3 times a week and brought food. So we probably were better off than some of the people at first, but eventually an organized kitchen did get going. And as I say, it was through the attorneys. We elected a committee, an executive committee, and set up rules. Eventually it was more like a regular little small city, and you'd have to have something like this. And people were assigned chores, jobs. Everyone over 15 had to have a job of some sort. Schools were started up. We had school teachers that we had before the war were also interned. And so we really started living somewhat of a organized life. It wasn't the life we'd had, but it was certainly, there was some organization to it. And we had many complaints, but we learned gradually to accept the situation the way it was.
Were there a lot of young people your age and younger?
It was the families that were out there, yes. It was a pretty good cross-section of ages, I'd say. We had schools that were, as I said, resumed after we got organized, and I can't recall, but I know there were 26 in my graduating class. I graduated from high school while I was there, and that was about the size of the classes. So it was, there were quite a few children. There were a few babies born. This was not supposed to have happened, and when this did, the fathers were put in jail for a while because it was they did not want families to be developing out there.
Just the conditions now, was your whole family together, or had you been split up?
Our family went in together. They separated men and women, which had to, of course, happen because of the crowded situation. We were in one of the buildings called the Annex. This was because I have a sister that was quite a bit younger. And so the families with young children quite a few of them were put in this annex. And my father chose to be one of the monitors at that building. That became his job. So he was allocated a position at that building. And my mother and my sister and I were in this annex. My brother, he was a senior in high school at the time of the war when it broke out. So he was in another building, separated. So for a few months we were together in the annex. And then we did move over to the main building, which I preferred because my friends were there, and we had an 8 o'clock curfew in the camp, and we had to be in our buildings at 8 o'clock. So as far as I was concerned, it was much more preferable to be with people with my own age.
Did the Japanese bother you much?
That's a question that we have asked. They really kept pretty much to themselves. They were very visible. We had roll call twice a day. That was compulsory. And if everyone was accounted for, it went well. If there was any mishap in that, if there was, for some reason, they couldn't account for all the people, we had to wait until they found out just what the reason was. And but generally, roll call took maybe half hour, 45 minutes. But no, they had the guards. They had the commandant who ran the camp, and people under him that helped. They pretty much kept to themselves. They dealt directly with our executive committee, and we would see the guards, of course, out in the camp. But no, we really had no personal contact. I will say, one time, closest contact. There were 2 instances that I had some personal contact. One of my duties for a while was to do gardening. So I had finished my gardening duties, and I was going back to the main building, and we had a few banana trees in the compound, and the leaves were very choice to have. If you could get one, you couldn't just strip the trees, because we were at one point, this was towards the last year or so, we did not have anything to cook with, no cooking oil. Anything that we could cook was just scraps usually, or what few things we could get together. Kits, maybe 3 times from the Red Cross. We were supposed to have had those monthly, but we only had 3, I believe, the whole time. Anyway, I had a banana leaf that I was able to get to go back, and I was on my way back, and I saw a guard coming across the field. And one of the rules was if a guard came within certain range, you were to stop and bow. And they had a certain type of bow that they expected us to do, which we did at roll call. We bowed as the commandant came through, or whoever was doing the job. And I was trying to avoid him, and sort of went out of my way, but he saw that I was doing this, so he made a point of getting over where I was. And I, of course, knew I had to bow. So I had my leaf, and I bowed quickly and started off. And I had to repeat that 3 times. He didn't want me to hold the banana leaf, and I had to bow with my hands to my side and do it correctly. So that was one confrontation. Another time, which was towards the end, we were allowed to have shanties built because of the crowded situation. They did allow some of this to take place where people could be out in the field, in the grounds of the camp, and set up shanties. They had restrictions. They had to be visible, I think it's 2 or 3 feet from the ground inside, so nothing could be going on that they couldn't see. And we had, my uncle and his family had a small little place set up. It wasn't a true shanty, but we were with them having a sort of a makeshift lunch, anything we could get together. And we were right next to what we called a bodega. It was a storage place where the Japanese were. And there was a screen between, but we could see the Japanese. There were a few Japanese occasionally over in that area. And we were having our lunch, and we could see this Japanese soldier not too far away eating from his mess kit. And he looked up several times, and after a while he didn't quite finish his food, and he took his mess kit and shoved it over to us, which we thought was very generous. And of course we took the food out. So there was, a few things that you felt there was some humanity in people, in the soldiers, and although we generally did not feel very kind towards them. But no, otherwise we really didn't have much contact. Something I hadn't mentioned was that the fact that my father had been in the Navy. He came in as a civilian with us, but they, about a year after we were there, Japanese, how they got word, I don't know, but they put out a notice one morning and said they knew there were military men in the camp and that they should report. And they gave them, I think, 2 or 3 hours to get ready because they were going to take them out. And they said if anyone did not report, that of course they would be executed. So it was a big decision that the family, my father and mother had to make, deciding whether his name was on the list or not. But he did report in, and it was just, as I say, 2 or 3 hours that they had to think about this. So he was taken to Cabanatuan, the military camp, and along with, I don't know, there were about 40 or 50, I'm not sure how many were in the camp. And we never did see him again. He was eventually put on a hell ship, the Orinoco Maru, which one of the ships that's I think there was, I don't know how many, several thousand. And they bombed the ship just shortly after it left Manila. And this was December, I think about the middle of December of 45, or 44 rather. And then they were put on another ship. They gathered up, quite a few were lost, put them on a second ship, and it got partway to Japan and was bombed. And they were still rescued some, and there was a third ship. My father did make it to the third ship, but didn't get to Japan. And the conditions were really, these conditions are unbelievable. And there's quite a few stories about this, books that have been written. And but we didn't know this until after the war. The fact that we thought when we were liberated, we thought possibly the other camp would be all the other camps would be liberated too, which they were eventually, but not at the same time.
How long were you held?
It was 3 years. 3 years and a month. So it seemed like forever at one time, but it actually its time is doesn't, you don't measure it the same way, I guess, in a situation like that. We went from day to day, actually, and if we hadn't had optimism about, getting out and from the beginning, I think it would have been much more difficult. But we just had a lot of faith in the fact that we would be remembered. I think MacArthur had said he would return, so we were banking on that too. And I think he did have to make some tough decisions. I think he was able to convince some of the other admirals and whatnot that it was important to get in, because I think had they waited, gone to Japan first, which I think was a general plan that was made, I don't think we would have been able to survive. We were losing people, 10, 15, 20 a day because of starvation. It was, towards the end, it was pretty grim.
Do you think the Japanese were just withholding food and?
Oh no. Oh no, they were not I think they were having problems with their own troops. Food was just generally not too available, but they certainly weren't. The food, a lot of the food that we were able to get was, some of the people in camp had some access or were able to, a couple of the families, I didn't know this till later, but they were able to procure some food that we probably wouldn't have had because of funds that they had, and were able to buy it, either from the Japanese or some. But we did have some that we wouldn't have had. But we were at the point where meat was practically, we never saw any meat in our diet. And it was pretty much cornmeal, and this was not choice cornmeal, it was cornmeal scrapings. A lot of it had, who knows what was in it. It was scraped off of the floors, I think, of storage areas. And we had vegetables because we raised them. A lot of the vegetables we had were what we were able to raise. And there wasn't too much, we never had, milk was, I think we had some canned milk at one time, or it was powdered milk. This is what we used out in the Philippines. But coconut milk was pretty much what we used. The meat, if we did have any meat, which was earlier, was a lot of it would be carabao, which was not in our general diet before the war. But we were happy to have anything that was protein. So most of us had beriberi and, vitamin deficiency diseases by the time we were liberated.
You mentioned beriberi. I remember hearing about it when I was young, but what is beriberi?
It's, I think, mostly a lack of vitamin B. And it's life-threatening if it gets to the point. What happens, I guess, when a body person does not have enough to eat, is that the body starts using all the fat, available fat, and then it starts using the protein, the muscle in the body. But beriberi itself, I think, is a vitamin deficiency disease, pretty much. And it's you start retaining water. One retains water, I think. And but I don't think it was just beriberi. That was just plain starvation that was probably the cause of a lot of people dying.
Did you ever have any idea of what they'd done to the American soldiers during that time?
We did not know about the death march, no. I'm not sure there weren't. I'm sure there were some that did. We had communication of some sort in our camp. We were not supposed to, of course, have any radios, but there were some radios, I believe, and we would get news. And of course, after the news is passed from person to person 20 or 30 times, it's never quite the same. It's a natural thing that will happen. And we, from day to day, the thing that kept us going was the fact that we thought, we would be out within a short time. And somebody would get some news tip. And but we did not, there may have been some that knew about the death march, but no, it was not, as far as I know, I didn't know about a lot of this until we were released, until we got back to the States.
What was it like when the war was over? How did you see what was happening?
it was just probably the most exhilarating experience I'd ever had. Our particular camp, Santo Tomas, was liberated by the 1st Cavalry, and the 37th Infantry came in, and I think 44th Battalion, the tanks, I don't know if that's part of the infantry or not, but they broke through the gates. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I think, on February the 3rd. And there had been, prior to this, we had been having a lot of air raids, American, and the B-29s were coming in, they were bombing. There were, and we'd have air raid sirens go off. We'd have to, of course, be in the building. They would not allow anyone out. They didn't want us looking out the windows if anything was going on, but we did peek. We couldn't stand to not see what was going on some of the time. And but this was quite. It was a dramatic experience. They came barging in, broke the gates, and I think the Japanese. There were Japanese, and they had dug foxholes at that point, lined up with machine guns and whatnot. And I guess they took care of all that frontline group in the front part of our camp, and came in, and we. It was just an experience. I mean, I can't imagine. We never really knew how we were going to be liberated. We expected to be liberated, but we didn't ever have any idea of how it would happen. But it wasn't until the next morning that we actually could start getting something going with food and whatnot. But of course, there was a lot of exchange of conversation with the soldiers, and but they were still. It was not a secure situation. The Japanese had they were really quite outnumbered by the Japanese in the city, and in the Philippines in general. So the fighting continued, and Manila. I guess I heard it was. Later, it probably took more devastation than any other city in the world. The bombings that took place, after we were liberated, we were shelled by the Japanese. We lost several people. They bombed the buildings, with their cannons, and we never had any air raid attacks, I don't think. But it was not a secure situation for quite a while. So.
But you were happy that the Americans at least got in.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, it was almost an unbelievable situation. Well, we were released on the 3rd, February, and on the 23rd, it's easy to remember these dates because it was such an important time in my life. They had picked names, the nurses that were in our camp. These nurses had come in, you mentioned about Bataan. They were brought in from Bataan. Now, I don't know whether they had an inkling about the Bataan Death March, because I think they were brought in pretty early, and then the March, I think, happened after that. But they were sent back first. They were flown back, I think, to the States. And then they had a lottery, and we happened to be one of the first families chosen. I would have stayed out a little longer because I had some friends I wanted to see we had another camp that had been developed because ours had gotten too crowded. We had gotten up to about 5,000 people. And so they had built this Los Baños camp, which was part of the agricultural college. And the day we were, C-47s came in. We were taken out to a road. It was not an airstrip. Put on some C-47s and taken out. Flew over Corregidor. I remember seeing parachutes. This is where the 11th Airborne had dropped in. And I heard later, we didn't know at the time, but the Los Baños camp was liberated on that day. And the planes that picked us up had just let off the 11th Airborne that morning at the Los Baños camp, which was a very dramatic rescue. And early in the morning, and that's another story, and I have a close friend that was involved with this. But then the C-47s came back to the Manila area, and we were put on those and taken to Leyte, which was the first area where they had come into the Philippines, and put on a ship. We were taken to the mainland there, near Tacloban, and they had a hospital, and I think they wanted to check us over before they had us come back to the States. They didn't want us bringing back a lot of bugs and whatnot. And so we were on mainland for about, Tacloban for about 3 days, and then taken out on a Liberty ship. And I know flying into Leyte was a spectacular experience because I think almost the entire U.S. Navy was out in that area, and it was unbelievable, the ships. I couldn't imagine another more magnificent sight. So that was quite something to behold. So then we left on a Liberty ship, came back, arriving back in March, took about a month. And it was still rather dangerous out in the waters. We had to cross the equator twice. I believe we had some sort of an escort coming back over.
What did you do when you came back to the United States?
We had no place to go except with family. So we went to my mother's parents' place in Glenwood Springs. And so they stayed there for, 2 or 3 months. I had graduated from high school and was ready for college. My brother and I both. My brother, of course, had been ready for 2 or 3 years. And we, just a month or so later, I left and came over to Denver, enrolled at Boulder. I wasn't sure whether I'd be accepted, but we sent our credentials up and there was no problem. They accepted us. And my brother went back east to MIT and started school. My mother, of course, was by herself, and she and a sister-in-law who was also out there, decided to move to Denver, and my mother didn't know just what to expect. We had not had any word about my father. We thought maybe he was in Japan. And so she had to go to work. We had no income particularly. There was funds that we'd had. There was business. My father had had a consulting business prior to the war, but none of that. The resources there, the money was not available. So it was pretty grim. It was getting started. I was fortunate to get a scholarship, and I believe my brother did too. So anyway, gradually we got things together.
So how long did it take till you really realized that your father was not coming?
Well, it was, I think, June when they found out, when Japan capitulated. Yeah, and that was a pretty hard experience.
It was a tough way to be a teenager.
It was, and yet there were some good times. I made very close friends, and I still have them.
Do you see them?
We have reunions, yes. We aren't having them quite as often. But no, we've always had, we started having reunions about, I'd say, 1980, when most of us were free to get away. Before that, we were pretty busy with family rearing. And so around 1980, we started having reunions every 5 years, and some in between, because we'd have a school reunion, and then we'd have POW reunions. School reunions were for anybody that had gone to the school out in the Philippines, which were POWs and people that were not interned. So we've had those pretty regularly.
Is it nice to get together with people now?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah. It's, as I say, some of my closest friends, and we keep up, even though most of us are in other states or separated.
Have you had any of these here in Denver?
Early on, we had some. They weren't organized for an entire group, but just Denver people. That was pretty early after we got back, and I think it was more for the generation my mother's age. And but no, we haven't had any in Denver, POW. And I suppose if I wanted to organize one, or a friend of here, but it's getting harder for people to get together. That's one of the problems. A lot of them just don't feel like traveling these days. And the organizing is getting to be more of a problem.
Makes it more important when they happen.
Well, that's right, yes. Yeah, there was supposed to have been one in Las Vegas last February. They usually try to have the POW reunion on the date, so it covers the date of our liberation. And somehow it didn't take off because the couple that were organizing it wanted to take a trip. They planned a big trip to the Philippines to go back there. There was a large group that went back there, so that was sort of the reunion. But maybe they'll do it again.
Have you been back?
I have a couple times. Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, of course, that seemed like home. When I came back and we were coming under the Golden Gate, I So it was a beautiful sight and to see the States, but I thought, oh, all of a sudden it hit me that I was very homesick from Philippines. I had grown up out there, so seemed like home. But when I went back, my husband had been working. Been out in Australia. This was about 1979. He had some work out there. He was with the mining department with Stearns Roger, and so we stopped in Manila for 3 or 4 days and got out to our house, which was still intact because being out from the city, it wasn't destroyed. And it was interesting because my mother had kept it after. Well, this was one thing. This was a positive thing because since it hadn't been destroyed, she was able to rent it out, and that was a nice source of income for a while. And then she eventually sold it, but found out it was when we were there in '79. It was owned by sisters of Colombian sisters. It was actually a school again. It was a school for training young students, and the Colombian sisters, I guess, come from Ireland. But it's interesting because the house, the man that had built the house, his parents, I think, had bought property, and it had originally been a monastery, a convent, a monastery that was probably built when the Spanish were out there in the 1600s. And he bought the property, built 4 houses, and so it's sort of interesting because it sort of turned around and has become a convent again. And then I did go back in about mid-'80s, and the house was torn down, partly because it wasn't really suitable for their work, and also termites are a big problem out there, and they had damaged most of the electrical wiring and whatnot. And we had become friends with his sister, Mary Kathleen, that was out there in charge. And I said, "Oh, did you keep the drawers on the house? They had been part of the original monastery or convent." And she said, I think they were, I don't know, but I didn't see them. But I said, just before we were interned, my father we had our sterling that the family had tied together and put between the rafters, or between the walls, so they might survive, and also some scotch. And she said, "Well, I don't know about," when they tore the house down, she says, "I don't know about the sterling, but I sure would have liked to have had the scotch." But so I've been in contact with his sister, and yes, I'd like to get back again. I'm not sure I'll make the trip. I should have on this last one that they made last February. I thought about it, but didn't do it at the last minute. So.
Okay, that's great.
Well.
Is there anything you think?
Well, I think an experience like that, you don't ever forget it, and it's part of your life, but it really gives you an appreciation for what our country is and having freedom, because when you don't have freedom, you give up a lot. And we did have, I'll say, I was probably in the best age group to have to go through an experience like that. We didn't have the responsibility of family. And I was with friends, and we got together, and we had some good times. In between, it got pretty rough at the back, pretty bad at the end because of the starvation that we had to endure. But we did have some pretty good times, as just in general. But I think parents with children there, that was a different situation, and they had the responsibility. And people that were older didn't do as well. So there was. And so there was some good with the bad. And I had a little trouble coming back to accept a lot of things that it was hard to accept Japanese people, or Japan is not an enemy. I mean, of course we're 2 generations down the line, and so you do try to get through that. So, but you do learn. It does there are some lessons you learn from an experience like this.
Do you think young people of today really understand what's been done for them?
I don't see how they can. I think you have to give up something to really appreciate what you do have. And I'm not sure I would have been any different, but I think But I think it's important to try to let them know the lessons of history are very important. And no, I think you almost have to experience the situation to really appreciate certain elements, certain things. And I wouldn't want to repeat the experience, but it was worth going through, I think, for what I learned, maybe. So, thank you for having me.